For the first time, a UN agency report says Israel is imposing an apartheid regime on the Palestinians. The Israeli government has strongly condemned the report. But can the findings change anything for the Palestinians? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abugaida. It's a strong word that conjures up for many the dark years of white oppression in South Africa. But for the first time, a United Nations agency has used the term apartheid to describe the situation Palestinians face every day in the occupied territories. The Israeli government has denounced the report, comparing it to Nazi propaganda. And the Office of the UN Secretary General says the document does not reflect its views. So we have a lot to discuss with our guests. But first, let's get some more details on the report, which was put together by the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. It says Israel is violating 3 international laws that list apartheid as a crime against humanity. The authors call Israel an apartheid regime, saying it operates a system of divide and rule. The report concludes that Israel systematically institutionalizes racial oppression and domination of the Palestinian people as a whole.
The importance of this report is not only because it is the first of its kind, that is published by one of the UN's bodies that clearly and frankly concludes that Israel is a racist state, that has established an apartheid system that persecutes the Palestinian people, but also it sheds light on the essence of the Palestinian cause and the conditions needed for accomplishing peace.
Well, a UN spokesman has distanced the report from the official views of the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres.
We just saw the report today, which, as you say, was published by ESCWA. It was done so without any prior consultations with the Secretariat. And the report as it stands does not reflect the views of the Secretary General. I would add that there is that the report, on the publication itself, it says that the report and its findings and conclusions are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the UN.
Well, it's not clear if this report will have any significance for the millions of struggling Palestinians, but many believe it could push their cause back on the international agenda. Imran Khan reports now on what life is like in the occupied West Bank.
With every pile of rock and dust moved by this bulldozer, Israel cements its position in the occupied West Bank. This under-construction road divides the Palestinian village of Nebi Ilyas in half. For the people who live here, it's a nightmare. They say it's almost destroyed the local farming community.
I have lost all my land. I have nothing left. And it's not just me. Everyone here has lost something.
Under the 1993 Oslo Accords, the West Bank is divided into 3 sections, areas A, B and C. A is under full Palestinian control and usually includes the towns and cities. B is jointly controlled by Israel and the Palestinian Authority and is often a village. C is Israeli controlled. However, it's Israel that holds the real power. It can and does shut down roads whenever and wherever it pleases. It often uses gates like these designed and placed strategically just for that purpose. This is Khalil Tafakji, who's a map specialist. He has criticized Israel for policies he says makes a Palestinian state almost impossible.
We have 2 states in one, a state for Israeli settlers geographically connected, and a state for Palestinian enclaves connected by bridges and tunnels. A Palestinian state in the West Bank is impossible because of the road network and infrastructure.
The United Nations ESCWA report says Palestinians living here in the occupied West Bank and Gaza are, in effect, subject to a separate law. The wording of the report says that Palestinians are subject in the West Bank to Israeli military law, and that settlers in the same area are subject to Israeli civilian laws. That is in itself a violation of the 4th Geneva Convention. The report also goes on to say that Palestinians are weakened because of the settlements within the West Bank and because of the siege of Gaza. And finally, the report concludes that Israel is operating an apartheid state. The Israelis are likely to strongly dispute the report, saying it's yet another example of United Nations prejudice towards the State of Israel. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera, Kalkilia in the occupied West Bank.
Well, before we get to our guests, just wanted to let you know that we did reach out to the Israeli government to take part in this program, but unfortunately, it has declined to do so. So now we'll bring in our guests. Joining us on Skype from Carbondale, Illinois, is Virginia Tilley. She's a co-author of the UN report and a political science professor at the Southern Illinois University. We'll also have with us Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. He's the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. He's also a former Palestinian information minister. He's joining us from Nablus, that's in the occupied West Bank, via Skype. And joining us from Jerusalem, Robbie Sable. He's a professor of international law at Hebrew University, also a former legal advisor to the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome to you all. Virginia Tilley, you were the co-author on this report, so perhaps it is best to start with you. Now, you say that in this report you look further than the occupied territories, and you say that Israel commits apartheid against all Palestinians, whether in 1948 territories, 1967 territories, or even Palestinians in exile. Can you explain that?
Yes, it's been an ongoing debate whether the question of apartheid can be analyzed by simply taking one of those segments. To say that Israel's policies toward Palestinian citizens of Israel is the proper approach, or Palestinians in the occupied territories would be the proper group to look at. But this was becoming inadequate. We needed to understand, or the member states of the ESCWA had requested an analysis that would allow them to understand what the overall overarching policy was. If there was one regime that was bringing all of these policies together into a coherent whole. And that was the charge that we had for the report, and it's the project that was undertaken.
So how did you reach this conclusion? I mean, you and your co-author, who's Richard Falk, say that this study concludes with clarity and conviction that Israel is guilty of the international crime of apartheid as a result of the manner in which it exerts control over the Palestinian people in their varying circumstances.
Well, the study was conducted in reference to international law. The proper approach legally is to refer to the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid and the definition of apartheid in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. I make a point of this using these long titles of the laws because a common mistake is to look at what happened in South Africa and take that as the benchmark. Say, well, if South Africa did it that way, it must be that way elsewhere in order to be counted as apartheid. International law has made, the language of international law in these conventions has made it clear that that's not the case, that the international law itself is the reference that we need to go by. It was drafted as a universal instrument to address apartheid wherever it might arise. So we used that, and we went through it rather exhaustively. We drew heavily on an earlier study, which had also gone through it exhaustively regarding the occupied territories. But the main finding in this case was that what looks like different policies are in fact part of one policy. The core purpose of all of these policies is to preserve Israel as a Jewish state. And the way that is interpreted by Israel is that it requires a Jewish majority, overwhelming Jewish majority, in order to ensure that Palestinians can never vote in any way that would alter the laws privileging the Jewish people over other people in the state. And we found that the ways that these different segments of the policy work together for Palestinian citizens, for residents of Jerusalem, Palestinians under occupation in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and Palestinians in exile all coordinate to achieve that central core purpose.
All right, Robbie Sable in Jerusalem, the only statement that we got from the Israeli Foreign Ministry is that they're saying that the report is not worth a comment, especially that the UN Secretary General himself says that the General Assembly or he were not consulted before ESCWA issued the report. We'll talk about his dismissal of the report in a moment, but first just give us a sense of how this is being seen in Israel.
Well, it's not an impartial UN report. It's worthwhile looking at this organization, ECWA. It consists of 18 states, all of whom are Arab states. Israel is in the Western Asia. It's not a member. It's not been allowed to be a member of this organization. It's not allowed to be an observer. It's not allowed even to be present at meetings of this organization. Therefore, we have an organization of 18 Arab states. This is not a UN impartial organization.
However, this is a UN body, Robbie Sable, so this must carry a weight and it must concern Israel somewhat.
It's an organization of 18 Arab states. Only Arab states are members of it. And as I said, Israel is not a member of it. This is not an impartial body. It's associated with the UN, but it's an Arab organization associated with the UN. And I think it should be treated as such.
Mustafa Barghouti, what do you make of the dismissal of Robbie Sable of this report? How much weight do you think that it carries, that this is the first time that many people are saying a UN body accuses Israel of apartheid?
Well, I think this is a very important report. It's an objective report. It's scientifically analyzing the situation. It's not a political document as much as it is an examination of the real situation on the ground. And they have rightly reached to the point of saying this is not just a military occupation that has been there for more than 50 years. It is already a system of apartheid, discriminating against Palestinians, whether those who were displaced from their land in 1948 or those who fell under Israeli occupation the last 50 years, or the Palestinians who live inside Israel and are treated in a discriminate manner, even when they are carrying Israeli citizenship. I think these complaints about the fact that Israel is not a member of that organization doesn't matter, because already 134 countries in the United Nations recognized the state of Palestine against the will of Israel. Every previous report was always rejected by Israel, including Goldstone report, remind you, including the ICJ resolution, the International Court of Justice, which is the highest court in the world, which said that the building of the wall is illegal, that the system of settlements is illegal, and that the annexation of Jerusalem is illegal. What we are talking about here is international law, which says that Israel is practicing practically a system of apartheid. Israel wants to be above international law. Each time we bring to the attention of the world the issue of occupation, they start talking about other issues. They want to avoid the truth and reality about what's going on. And I hope that the Secretary General of the United Nations will not subject himself to the Israeli terror that is practiced against many people, trying to force them to change their minds.
Well, the Secretary General himself did distance himself from the report, Mustafa Barghouti, saying that it doesn't reflect the views of himself, nor was it done with consultations with the UN Secretariat. So why, in your opinion, is he distancing himself?
Well, in my opinion, Israel practices psychological terror against many leaders of the world, including the United Nations Secretary General in this case. And I don't know how he allows himself to distance himself from a report that is coming from a UN agency. First of all, these agencies do not have to consult with him before issuing the report. This is a scientific piece. This is a piece that has analyzed the situation and came up with specific conclusion. And I think one of the authors was himself the rapporteur for the Human Rights Council in the United Nations, which also is opposed by Israel constantly. This report shows that the world community, the international law is on one side, and Israel and its practices is on the other side. That is the reality, and that's why Israel should be subjected to boycott, divestment, and sanctions like the system of South African apartheid system was. This seems to be the only way to force Israel to respect international law.
Virginia Tilly, what are you hoping to achieve with this report now that it's been put out? What can it change practically on the ground?
Well, in the recommendations that came with the report that was put forward, there were two general categories of things we hoped would follow. One is that the findings of the report be presented for consideration by the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, as Mr. Barghouti just mentioned, regarding the Wall case, to get an advisory opinion from this authoritative body. Unfortunately, because this is an ongoing situation of acute human rights violations, we also felt that that was inadequate on its own, that there needed to be some actions by member states to oppose this, to undertake, upon reviewing the report and weighing its merits, the obligations that are spelled out in international law regarding the ending this regime. It's a regime from which human beings are presently
But how likely
suffering.
is that, given that from past history we've seen that states and official bodies are not likely to take the lead?
Oh, well, you know, these things do take time sometimes, and it can be quite frustrating for people who want a quick answer. Looking at the South Africa case, we might remember that it took decades to defeat apartheid there. I hope it will not take decades. In this case, I don't think we can afford it, partly because the spillover effects of this regime in the region are very grim. It's contributing to, no, of course, it's not the sole cause, but it's certainly contributing significantly to the unrest in the region and tensions in the region. And we don't have 30 years to play with. But just on your point about the United Nations, I wasn't surprised the Secretary General said what he said, because people do tend to say the United Nations said that, conflating all these different bodies. And his point was, it's not me. I didn't have anything to do with it. I think the most important body is the General Assembly, and what I would like to see is for the General Assembly to reestablish the Committee on Apartheid, which was dismantled after apartheid fell in South Africa, to provide a forum for scholars such as Mr. Sable, frankly, to bring evidence and debate the issue, and to bring scholarly expertise together and determine as a matter of urgency what needs to happen.
Robbie Sable, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I would. A couple of points. First of all, Dr. Barghouti talked about the International Court of Justice and the Wall case. The International Court of Justice deliberately refrained from using the word apartheid because they were aware that this is a malicious smear. And the attempts now to associate it with South Africa is a smear. One only has to look at Israeli society. It's a multiracial society. There's an Arab minority of about 20%, which has the problems of minority, but they vote, they have parties, they have judges, they have professors, they have generals in the army. The dean of my law faculty, where I teach, is an Arab. This is not apartheid.
Are you saying that they have the full rights that are granted to Jewish people, Mr. Sable?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Absolutely.
A lot of people would disagree with that statement.
They might. I think they don't know Israeli society. They've never walked through an Israeli street, seeing the people of different hues and different colours. They've never met it. Just a moment. Just a moment. I did not interrupt you. I did not interrupt you. Just a moment, please.
Mr. Sable, go ahead, and I'll come over to you, Mr. Barghouti, in just a moment.
Thank you. They did not see Arab judges, Arab Supreme Court judges sitting. They haven't seen Arab cabinet ministers. All of them sit in Israel. I hope we can see a day when we would see Jewish cabinet ministers in an Arab state, perhaps in a Palestinian state. But in Israel, we do see it in all branches of life. This is not apartheid. They know it's not apartheid. It's a malicious smear. Now, you can criticize Israel, and I, among others, also criticize Israel, but trying to smear it with the taint of apartheid, frankly, is false, and that's why it will have no effect. If you want to have real effect, you have real criticism and not try and smear it with apartheid. It ain't apartheid.
Mustafa Barghouti.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me tell you, I know Israel very well. I am subjected to the oppression of Israel already for 50 years. But let me explain. First of all, ex-president of the United States, Jimmy Carter, used the word apartheid. I don't think he's a man that can be described as unknowledgeable or as an enemy of Israel. Many world leaders are saying now this is a system of apartheid, including Ronnie Kasrils, who's a Jewish white minister, was Jewish white minister in the government of South Africa, who visited us. And when I said this is a system similar to the apartheid system in South Africa, he said, no, this is much worse than what we had in South Africa. Let me remind you that when Israel was established in 1948, the Arabs owned, the Palestinians owned 82% of the land of Israel. Today they own less than 3.5%. Who took away their land? It's the state of Israel, the government of Israel. What made Nazareth and so many other Arab communities lose the land around them? Who is now destroying Palestinian villages in the Negev and Bedouin villages there? It is the Israeli government. Tell me, how do you describe a situation when a Palestinian in the West Bank is allowed to use no more than 50 cubic meters of water per year, while an illegal Israeli settler can use up to 2,400? Isn't that apartheid? How do you call a situation when we, the Palestinians who are living in the West Bank, are prohibited from using main roads that are segregated roads, that are exclusive to to Israeli people? Isn't that apartheid?
I believe those are a lot of the things that are outlined in the report, Mustafa Barghouti. But crossing over to Virginia Tilley for just a moment, because I see you wanted to interject when Robbie Sable was speaking. Please tell us what you wanted to say. And also, let me just put this to you, because you say one of the report's key aims is to encourage practical measures in accordance with international law to exert pressure on Israel to dismantle its apartheid regime. But Israel denies that it's an apartheid regime, and you hear what Mr. Robbie Sable has to say. So when you have that denial from the Israeli government, how difficult is it then to go forward with this process of dismantling, as you call it?
Well, let me try to take those in order. The reason that I was hoping to have a moment in the middle of the exchange was this is, it's not a scholarly thing to say there is this practice or that practice, this is not apartheid, that is not apartheid because it doesn't look like apartheid. You know, we are not, the report is not based on that kind of thing. The report is based on international law. And unfortunately, the good Professor Sable, who I believe could make a serious contribution to some good scholarship on this, is doing the same thing that we felt obliged in the report to take on at an early stage. I hope you will read that section. And that is to say there are many definitions of apartheid out there that are drawing from all over the place. The idea of voting, okay, let's take that as a prominent one. If you can vote but not against your own oppression, then the voting becomes meaningless in that regard. And that's the case in Israel. The international law says that it is apartheid if there is a purpose of domination built into the practices and policies that we see. And in this case, that's what we found. And it obviously does no good whatever to do ad hominem attacks and say this is a vicious smear because look, you know, we have a Arab judge who sits on the bench over here. You know, it's not a scholarly thing to say. It's not a legal analysis. It's a you know, seat of the pants kind of tokenism to talk about stuff like that. It's not entirely irrelevant, but when you look at the larger picture, it becomes irrelevant. Now, okay,
let's put this to Robbie Sable, because we just have about 30 seconds left. How does international law, will it be implemented in this case? Robbie Sable.
I would like to go back to a major issue of international law, the right of self-determination. The Palestinians in the West Bank have a right of self-determination. We recognize it. I hope that they will recognize that we in Israel, the Jewish people, have a right of self-determination, and we're still waiting to get that recognition. That is the core of the issue. Thank you.
All right, I'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for all of my guests, Virginia Tilley, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, and Robbie Sable. Thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For myself and the whole team here in Doha, goodbye for now.